trucks are different. Tacoma is built for your life's adventures. Dependable day in and day out for weekend warriors and as a die-hard work truck. Tacomas also do better when it comes to fuel costs. Now's the time to buy right. Toyota trucks are different.
Inside PressBox is presented by Freedmont Mortgage. Don't make a 30-year mistake by choosing the wrong lender. Go to Freedmont.com now for all of your mortgage needs. And welcome into a very special, and I do mean special, edition of Inside PressBox. I'm your host, Stan the Fan Charles, and this week's program is all about the first true Baltimore Raven to be enshrined into the Pro Football Hall of Fame, Jonathan Ogden, first player ever drafted by then young general manager Ozzie Newsome in 1996. A player that ended up setting the bar very high for the NFL's newest team at the time. In to discuss Ogden the man and Ogden the player are two men intimately involved with the Ravens starting day one. The first ever broadcaster on the radio, Scott Garceau, who along with former Baltimore Colt Tom Matte broadcast every game the team played from 1996 to 2005. But joining us first is a man I'm proud to call a friend, the Baltimore Ravens' first ever team president, David Modell. It was David's father, the late, great Art Modell, who returned pro football to Baltimore in 1996 after what seemed an interminable absence of 13 years. David, we welcome you to the show, and always great to spend some time with you.
Thank you. It's great to be here with you. Thank you.
You know, we talk about Jonathan Ogden, who just went into the Hall of Fame, and we talk about how he set the bar so high. But your dad and you and Ozzie kind of set the bar for how this franchise was going to run moving forward from day one that it moved to Baltimore.
Well, that's kind of you to say. Yeah, but, you know, obviously we wanted this to be a franchise that was a model franchise. We were a brand new franchise, starting from scratch. And so that first ever pick is just such a critical pick because it really does exemplify what you hope to be about. And you can't miss on that one. That's just one you want to get right.
Well, David Ginsburg, who wrote the piece in our book, Jonathan Ogden, the first true Baltimore Raven, or the first ever Baltimore Raven, tell us about, he wrote that story, what the discussions were, because, you know, you wanted to make a sexy pick in some regard. You wanted to have some type of splash with your first draft. And an offensive lineman isn't a sexy pick.
Oh, but football people obviously quite key.
Drooled over Jonathan Ogden.
Paul Brown's first ever pick was a center for the Cincinnati franchise. So obviously that's a critical pick. You know, I think that year there was a discussion about Lawrence Phillips. That was a league-wide discussion about Lawrence, who was a fine talent coming out of college. And we sat, Art and I sat with Ozzie the day before the draft, and Ozzie was very clear. You know, he's a very direct guy, and he said, you know, this is an attractive guy and all the rest of that, but this is the first ever pick. This is the fourth pick in the draft. This is a guy who has to play for us. This is a critical pick. And if we want to satisfy having a guy who potentially is going to play his entire career here, will potentially be in the Hall of Fame, and is going to be in the Pro Bowl every year and start first all the time, John Ogden is the guy. That's before the draft. Astonishing. He called it.
It is.
That's like Babe Ruth standing there calling the shot.
But most people assumed it wasn't who you would pick. It was whether or not you'd get the chance at Jonathan Ogden. It was thought that number 3, picking the Arizona Cardinals, were going to take J.O. What was the discussion like leading up to that? And how did it play out when Arizona passed him and took Simeon Rice?
Well, there are always those fears. Anytime you're on the clock, you know, the guy who you'd like, you're always worried about that. And things always happen in the draft. You know, things fall, things move. But Ozzie's philosophy is the best guy on the board. And so, you know, those guys are very businesslike about how they do it. It's not really a super emotional room. And so, you know, if John had been selected and was unavailable to us, I'm absolutely sure that Ozzie would have said, well, okay, let's move on to the next guy. And we would have done that.
Let's move on.
But I'm very happy we did.
I know.
I just want to say that.
Let's move on to the next topic, though. now you drafted Jonathan Ogden. Now you meet him, or he comes into town.
Yes.
What were your first impressions of him?
Well, the media part of it is what it is, and that happens so quickly, and then off he goes. My first opportunity with him at length was when I went to go negotiate his contract with his agent, Marvin Demoff, and I think I wrote about it in the forward. And Marvin gets on the phone. We sit down in his office, and Marvin gets on the phone. I said, "Who are you calling?" He goes, "I'm calling Jonathan. I'm going to have him come over and sit with us." I'd never heard of this before in my life. I'm like, "Okay, that's what you want to do. That's what we'll do." Couldn't have been a better guy.
Yeah.
Participated in the conversation. Didn't sit there like a lump, but participated in the conversation. And as a result, we were really able to get it done that afternoon. It was probably the quickest first-round negotiation in the history of the NFL. And he couldn't have been greater. And after that, we went and had dinner, and Marvin Demoff had his wife and his family come, and we had dinner with John. And watching the interplay, the familial interplay, it was obvious that Marvin made Jonathan a part of his family. It was obvious that Jonathan felt that Marvin was a part of his, so there was this familial warmth. So you got this sense of quality of a human being. And
now you draft a guy, now you sign a guy. Now it's training camp or the beginning of his first season.
Now all I have to do is play, right?
And you watch the guy. Do you remember a conversation? We got a little over a minute here in this segment.
Okay.
But a time where Ozzie said, "That's what I was talking about."
Now I'll tell you my own eyeballs. Now I'm not I don't consider myself a football guy per se, but I do after a long time kind of know what I'm looking at.
Yeah.
And there was a play in the Rams game. There was a sweep of some form or another, a pass play out on the corner. John Ogden was then playing inside in the guard position,
right? He was playing guard.
And he came out and he was basically leading, and he was outrunning EB Ernest Biner, and poor little Todd Light was standing down the field. There was one guy, and God bless Todd Light. He didn't duck. He took the hit. But watching Jonathan Ogden run down the field at that speed, at that size, was remarkable. I was like, wow, boy, Ozzie couldn't have been righter with a guy like this, to stretch a word. This guy's a phenom.
All right. Our guest is David Modell. When we return, we're going to bring in the team's first ever broadcaster, Scott Garceau, to continue our discussion of now Hall of Famer Jonathan Ogden. That's up next, right after this.
Want a great t-shirt for the female sports fan in your life? Check out the Your Turn t-shirt, available now at yourturntshirt.com.